I think we all realised that it was a one-way mission anyway.
Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum Podcast. The museum is located near Manchester in the UK, and you can find more details at avroheritagemuseum.co.uk. This episode is with Trevor Jackson, a former Vulcan pilot who recalls his path into the RAF from school cadet in the 1950s through to flying the nuclear-armed Avro Vulcan. Trevor shares the story of his RAF career via the BAC Jet Provost, Folland Gnat, and onto the legendary Avro Vulcan. We talk in detail about his Vulcan career, including being part of the nuclear quick reaction alert and how he and his crew handled their huge responsibility. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. I'm delighted to welcome Trevor Jackson to the Avro Heritage Museum Podcast.
I was in the Royal Air Force section of the Combined Cadet Force at school. Thoroughly enjoyed my career. Got my A and B gliding licenses. I went up to Hornchurch for pre-assessment for aircrew selection. Got through that. And so they said, once you're old enough, come back and we look forward to seeing you. So it seemed to be the logical thing. The only interesting thing for me was that when I turned up at Hornchurch, they asked me why I hadn't gone to join the Fleet Air Arm, because I came from Portsmouth. And I said, well, I've seen enough of the Navy and I want to join the Royal Air Force. So that was how it came about.
And when was that?
I would have gone to Hornchurch for the first time probably in 1959, because the next time I went, they had relocated to RAF Biggin Hill. So it was about that time.
So two classic Battle of Britain stations there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And indeed, at that time, when I went to Hornchurch, it was still the old wooden buildings. And the thing that I'll never forget is that inside, on the wall, were all these sketches of the World War II fighter pilots, all done by Pat Rooney. Now, that is quite interesting because as we go through this, I met Pat Rooney when I joined the Royal Air Force, and I have a sketch that he did of me.
And by joining the Royal Air Force, did you get that feeling of standing in the shoes or following in that sort of rich, very much an awareness of the rich history of the Royal Air Force?
I suppose, yes, but I was not conscious of it. It was just that from the age of 10, all I wanted to do was fly aeroplanes. I just look back and I think, gosh, how lucky am I to have fulfilled my life's dream from the age of 10 to the day that I retired.
Indeed, and we will be going through this amazing career of yours. Can you talk me through your initial training that you had with the RAF?
Right, well, yes. When I went back to Biggin Hill and expected to sail through, I had a medical problem. And at that time, any problems were a no-no. And so they said, sorry, but we can't take you on as aircrew. But I was determined to join the Royal Air Force. So I did. And indeed, I found myself on my basic training with a number of national servicemen. And it turned out subsequently that it was one of the very last national service intakes into the Royal Air Force. And I went into a branch of the medical profession, and I was doing what these days are perfectly routine tasks in medical research. But at that time, computers hadn't been invented, neither had microchips, so the equipment was rather large. I was working at the Central Medical Establishment in London for Air Vice Marshal Sir Aubrey Rumble, who was the Queen's heart surgeon. And after a few years, I was doing ECGs on myself, checking that my heart was okay, and it was eventually. And one morning I went in to see Sir Aubrey, and I said, "Sir, it's been a pleasure working for you, but my heart is flying if I can. And I'd very much like to go back down to the Aircrew Selection Centre." And he said, "Right, I will be one of your referees, and if you go along the corridor to Bill Baird, he'll be your other referee." And so I went along to Biggin Hill with some rather important gentlemen as my referees. I got through the test this time, and I joined the Royal Air Force. I was already in the Royal Air Force, but I transferred across to Aircrew, went to South Cerney, and from there I went to Acklington up in Northumberland for my basic flying training on the Jet Provost.
What was the Provost like to fly? It was a fun aircraft to fly?
I can't really remember all that much about it, other than the fact that it did what it said on the tin. You could do aerobatics in it, no problem at all, and it was very forgiving aircraft. While I was at Acklington, Pat Rooney came into my life, and he was quite an aged gentleman by now, and he would continue plying his trade, doing sketches of people, and I think it was £5. And he did a sketch of me.
We're looking at a lovely sketch of Trevor here, which hopefully we'll be able to add to the episode notes and show that.
As you can see, I actually smoked cigarettes in those days. I played squash and bridge, which appear on there. Not very well. And after a year, got my wings, and off I went to advanced flying training at Aria Valley then. And then I flew the Folland Gnat. Now that really was a fun aircraft to fly. Had a rate of roll of 400 degrees a second, and so you could roll it rather fast. I remember the great technique was to come from the south over Snowdon, close the throttle, and glide to come down and open up the throttle on final approach at 500 feet, do either a landing or a roller landing.
And at that point, did you know what sort of role you were going to enter, what type of aircraft you were going to be flying with the RAF?
No. One was called into the flight commander's office, as we all were, and asked what our interests were. And at that time, the Air Force needed quite a few pilots to fly the Vulcan. And we were all asked, how do we feel about flying the Vulcan? And I said, well, it's an aeroplane. And so rather than find myself going on to fly Hunters, which apparently I was supposed to have done, I found myself being invited to go to Finningley, to number 230 OCU, where I joined a crew, and we trained up flying the Vulcan B2, as at that time the B1s were all being phased out.
Can you take me through your first flight in the Vulcan?
I can't particularly remember the first flight. I can remember my flight instructor was a lovely Irishman by the name of Paddy Lambert. But I can remember our first solo as a crew. It sounds a bit strange because there were 5 of us, 2 pilots, 2 navigators and the AEO in the back. But we're all going through our pre-flight checks, and the radar had tuned into the BBC, and he had this coming through our headsets. And there we were going through the pre-flight checks, and I think it was the Shelley Mann Singers singing the song Fly Away in My Magnificent Balloon. And okay, the Vulcan's not a balloon, but that became my theme tune for many years. I never forgot that.
I can imagine that sticking as a memory there. Flying the Vulcan, what was it like to fly?
The Vulcan was a very nice aircraft from a pilot's point of view. The cockpit was very cramped. Very little, you were very friendly with your other crew members. But it was the first time I'd flown an aircraft with other crew people. And so it was a different perspective altogether. And we flew as a constituted crew for a number of years, and it was great fun. We flew around the world several times, and at the end of my time, I shed a tear when I left the Vulcan, but I then became a flying instructor. Initially, quite a change there, because I became a flying instructor on the Chipmunk.
I just want to ask a few more questions around the Vulcan. I've heard that the Vulcan did fly almost like a fighter to some degree in terms of manoeuvrability. Is that an overemphasis, would you say?
No. When Roly Falk first flew the Avro 698, as it was originally called, the prototype to the Vulcan, it had a bomber aircraft control yoke. And he was so impressed by the manoeuvrability of the aircraft, he said, get rid of that control yoke and put a fighter aircraft control column on, which is why the aircraft was subsequently fitted with the fighter aircraft control column. And of course, Roly Falk subsequently went on to perform a barrel roll at the 1955 Farnborough Air Show, where he got airborne and rolled the aircraft, much to the chagrin of the suits from the SBAC, who asked him to desist from doing it in future.
With your training on the Vulcan, you're trained at that point to fly as a high altitude bomber, I'm presuming.
We did both roles. I was on 44 Squadron and 101 Squadron at Waddington, and our role was both in the nuclear and the conventional role. In the nuclear role, we did our quick reaction alert duties, where we were on 15 minutes readiness at any one time, being brought to 5 minutes readiness or 2 minutes readiness at the behest of the bomber controller in the bunker at High Wycombe. We would drop the nuclear weapon at low level, so we practiced at 300 feet by day and 1,000 feet by night. But we also had a conventional role where we would drop up to 21 1,000-pound HE bombs, and we would drop those from high altitude. So at that time, we could go out to El Adem in Libya and drop the sticks of bombs in the desert out there. We also had low altitude weapons, which were parachute retarded, which could be dropped from low altitude. So we were very versatile. In fact, the Vulcan was an incredible aircraft because it was designed for high altitude work. When the V-Force went from high level to low level, it was the only one of the three V-bombers that successfully transited from high level to low level because of that fantastic wing that Roy Chadwick had designed. I say Roy Chadwick had designed. He was the initial designer of the aircraft, but it was subsequently changed by Stuart Davies and then Roy Ewins.
Right, yeah, because the other two V-bombers were suffering from structural problems when they were flown at low level, I think, consistently.
Well, the Valiant had, it was made of a suspect alloy and it broke its main spar. The Victor was using up its fatigue life rather quickly, so they were converted to tankers.
Mm-hmm. And very successful in those roles as well. You mentioned the QRA there. Can you talk me through like a QRA scramble, for example? Would you be seated in the aircraft?
Each station had its own peculiarity with the setup of the QRA. We at Waddington had on Alpha Dispersal, it was the old World War II 4 dispersal areas. We had 3 aircraft on QRA for the 3 squadrons. The 4th bay was the reserve for bringing a reserve aircraft on. And the aircraft would be armed, fueled, connected to external power to keep the gyros up and running. And as I say, we were on 15 minutes readiness. We had dedicated dormitories. We could go to the ops centre where we could update our war plans. We had a bomber box that beeped every 10 seconds, letting us know that it was live. And the bomber controller would bring us from 15 minutes to 5 minutes readiness. 5 minutes, we would jump into our crew transport, race out to the aircraft, jump in, get the engines going, and then we would be stood down. If it was a 02, not only would we get the engine started, but we would get the external power disconnected and we would taxi onto the runway. So you would have all the aircraft on the runway ready to go. Then we had to have the daily codes for what we were going to do next, whether to go back to dispersal or to actually get airborne. And of course, as we know, it was always to go back to dispersal. Otherwise, probably none of us would be here today.
Yeah, understood. In the event that you didn't go back to dispersal and you were sent to drop the nuclear weapon, what would have been your target?
Well, it depended. Our targets changed, but it was one of the many targets that we had in Russia. Some of them were very far in, and there was no recovery to the UK. You would have to recover to a third country. How they would feel about that, who knows?
Did you talk amongst yourselves as to what your plans would be after dropping the weapon?
In a light-hearted way, yes, I suppose. Some people used to think that they would go to some island drinking beer and putting their toes in the water, but that was just light-hearted banter, and I think we all realised that it was a one-way mission anyway.
How did you feel about that? What was your view on the fact that if you had to go, you wouldn't come back, and also the magnitude of what you were dropping?
I don't think we allowed it to dwell on our minds too long, because you would possibly end up in some dark place. So it was just, we got on with the job, and we worked hard and we played hard, and it was just one of those phases. Everybody knew that mutually assured destruction was Armageddon, and therefore everything was done to try and avoid it.
You mentioned that your targets were quite deep into the Soviet Union. What was considered the greatest threat to the Vulcan? Was it Soviet fighters or Soviet surface-to-air missiles?
The interesting thing is, when we used to go into plans and update our war plans, the maps, we would draw red circles for where the SAM sites were. And eventually it started off with just red circles. But then towards the end, it looked as if somebody had had a nosebleed from Norway down to the Black Sea with all this red everywhere. So it was quite daunting, but you realise that somebody would get through, and that was the positive message.
Presumably you were dropping, was it the Blue Danube? Or?
No. It was the WE-177, the weapon that was developed for TSR-2.
Right.
That was compared with some of the earlier weapons. It was a fairly low yield. It was either a 20 kilotons or a 40 kiloton warhead. Quite adequate.
So I wanted to talk to you about evacuation from the aircraft in the event of an emergency, because from what I understand, the pilot and co-pilot had ejector seats.
Yes.
But the other three members of the crew did not.
No. And I suppose over the years that was a bit of a controversy. But you have to bear in mind that when the aircraft was being developed, it was not thought that the aircraft would be in service for any more than 10 years. The cost of changing the aircraft so that everybody had an ejection seat was phenomenal, and it would have put back its introduction into service by a number of years. So therefore, the decision was made, let us leave it with the 2 ejection seats for the pilots and the rear crew get out through the entrance door, which is fine if the aircraft is in the air with the undercarriage up. You can just fall and free fall, no problem. But if the undercarriage was down, the first thing that you would encounter going out through that entrance door would be the nose gear assembly, splatting your nose on that. So a technique had to be developed for them to grab hold of the entrance door strut and swing around to avoid it. If the aircraft was on the ground and the undercarriage was up, or the aircraft had collapsed in some way and you couldn't get out through the door, then if we were not quick enough to get out through the front, we would feel a very heavy boot on our shoulders as these 3 gentlemen from the back would jump on our shoulders and go over the side out of the top of the aircraft. We, of course, had the ejection seat with the handle at the top, or the handle between the knees. But never had to use it.
Different Vulcans that you flew, was there a lot of variation? If you were flying a different Vulcan, did it feel different, or were they very much the same?
Most of them were quite the same. Like all aircraft, or I suppose even cars for that matter, you have the hangar queens who seem to spend an awful lot of time being repaired for one reason or another. Yes, they behaved slightly differently at times, but in the main, the aircraft were very responsive. And of course, those wonderful Olympus engines, if you had the 301 engines, that was 80,000 pounds of thrust. So it was some machine. We would do air displays around the world, and the Americans appreciated it because we were, as they called us, the 4-engined fighter, and we would do displays within the confines of an airfield, whereas the B-52 would take up the whole of a state to do a flyby.
What would you say was the thing you most liked about flying the Vulcan?
Funnily enough, the thing that was actually quite... it had nothing to do with actually flying the aircraft, but if you were doing a night exercise and you got back in the early hours of the morning and you would go to the aircrew feeder for a ham and egg breakfast, and a few of us would then, as dawn broke, go off to Woodall Spa and play a round of golf. That was a nice moment.
I like that image. I really like that image. What would you say is the thing you least liked about flying the Vulcan?
I suppose there were hours of doing nothing, really. And I'm not a person who likes to not do something. On QRA, a lot of people, we would play cards. Some people would play snooker, table tennis. Others made aircraft models. I think some were writing books. There was a lot of time when you were just twiddling your thumbs, really.
Did you ever watch the film Dr. Strangelove at the time?
Oh, yes, we all did.
What did you make of it being at the sharp end?
Well, in truth, that film didn't have as much impact as Thunderball, because Thunderball was a very good James Bond film, but it rather Hollywoodized the Vulcan. There is no way that a Vulcan could fly from the UK to Bermuda without refueling quite a few times. Certainly there is no door from the bomb bay into the cockpit either, and certainly the concept of a gentleman being able to asphyxiate the crew, it was a bit of hyperbole. With
the Vulcan, or at any time, did you undergo any escape and evasion training?
Yes, we had done that really prior to. What we did was sea survival more than anything else, going into the North Sea or down to Plymouth Sound. Sometimes when we went out to the Far East, there would be a jungle survival course that some people went on. I think we all were given instruction in jungle survival.
There was no training as to, if you were captured or anything like that, how you would behave or expected to behave?
Well, other than the usual number, rank and name.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on the second part of Trevor's story, as well as future episodes.